So, for example, I do have an image that I love, which is a woman in a tub holding a book, having a bath and a bottle of wine, and the entire room covered with mosquitoes and insects. And there's a caption that says, "If amphibians go extinct, you'll notice." And that's why I try to explain people that there's a lot of services that amphibians provide us that we're unaware of. And just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Welcome back to another episode of the Protect the World podcast. Every month, I connect with a different not-for-profit organisation that's making the world a better place. My goal is to learn about the issues they're tackling, interview the founder or director, and then share their stories with you. But I don't just want to share their stories. I want to contribute to their work as well. If you'd like to help me, you can sign up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes. The voice you heard at the beginning of this podcast belongs to Gina Della Togna, Executive Director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance. In this episode, Gina joins me from Panama to discuss the work of the Amphibian Survival Alliance as a global coalition dedicated to the long-term protection of amphibians. Consisting of frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians, amphibians are the most threatened vertebrate group on the planet, and the combined impacts of habitat destruction, climate change, and disease are decimating populations across the world. However, thanks to the work of Gina and her team, a number of species have quite literally been brought back from the brink of extinction. Gina is one of those unique conservationists who is simultaneously a brilliant researcher, a clever communicator, and an inspiring leader. And I hope she inspires you to get to know the amphibians found in your corner of the world. So now I bring you Gina Della Togna, Executive Director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance. Gina Della Togna, a very warm welcome to the Protect the World podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. I'd like to start by asking, who are you and how do you describe yourself?
Well, my name is Gina Della Togna. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance, and I'm also a research associate to the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. I've been working on amphibian conservation for quite a while now. Formerly as a scientist, I still do scientific work, but now I have kind of jumped into the conservation realm more deeply, and I'm working coordinating globally efforts for amphibian conservation action. I've been very involved with other conservation initiatives before, not only with amphibians, with other species such as tapirs, for example, Central American tapirs to be exact. And I'm a biologist. I have a molecular and cell biology background. I did my PhD in the University of Maryland in the United States, and the postdoc training in the Smithsonian National Zoo Conservation Biology Institute and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute here in Panama. And how do I describe myself? Well, I think I'm very determined, passionate about what I do. I really want to create a change out there and try to help others make a change. And since working with amphibians, my world's become amphibians 100% and try to mitigate the amphibian extinction crisis around the world. So I'll do whatever I have to do to push these efforts forward and to help others make a change.
Brilliant. That sounds very, very exciting. I didn't realize you'd worked with tapirs in the past. One of my favorite memories from the jungles here in Peru was coming face to face with a tapir as I came around the bend on one of the trails at the research station that I work at. So that's really cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was really special. But we're here to talk about amphibians, obviously. And we'll get into the work of the Amphibian Survival Alliance shortly, but let's begin with the basics. What are amphibians and what kinds of threats are they facing?
Well, amphibians are vertebrates, and this is the most endangered vertebrate class at the moment. 41% of all amphibians are threatened with extinction. Every year, the number of new described species increases. Right now, we're, I think, about 8,700 described species, and sadly, 41% of those are endangered. So these are very spectacular animals. First of all, they are distributed all around the world, except with, of course, the poles. But they have the most diverse reproductive strategies from all animals. They inhabit practically every ecosystem, and they become an essential part of the ecosystem functioning, meaning that they, in the trophic chain, they hold let's say the middle of the trophic chain, or the pyramid.
I want to make sure this podcast is accessible to people with a non-scientific background, so I'm going to occasionally jump in with explanations of certain terms, and I'll include links in the show notes for anyone wanting additional information. So trophic is a scientific term relating to food and nutrition, and trophic chains, also called food chains, describe how a series of organisms consume each other within an ecosystem. So individual species occupy different trophic levels in the chain, which is often presented as a pyramid. Okay, back to the podcast.
So many species depend on them as prey, and they prey on a lot of, let's say, invertebrates and insects in the ecosystem synergy and functioning mechanisms. So amphibians are essential quality indicators of ecosystems. For example, they're indicators of water quality. So I always invite people to assess the water bodies around them, and if there are no amphibians on them, there's probably something wrong with that body of water. Meaning a small lake or a big lake or a river or a stream, because they are very sensitive to the external environment. So they will pick up on the smallest changes in quality, temperature, composition, or chemicals present in the environment, and they will either migrate and leave that area or die. So they are very, very good indicators of ecosystem quality as well. So yes, these amazing individuals and a group of animals, as I mentioned before, have a amazing number of strategies for reproduction. So they have kind of evolved and they have adapted to the different environments they inhabit by evolving their reproductive mechanisms. So for example, you'll have the aquatic species that they will reproduce in water, and probably some of them will live in the water all of their lives, or those that will metamorphose and then leave the water and have a terrestrial adult life, or those that will reproduce inland, so the terrestrial ones. And then some of them will, for example, make a hole in the sand and then dig a hole and bury their eggs. Some of them are direct developers, so they don't have a tadpole stage. And then a very tiny, small adult will come out of the egg. We have the marsupial ones. Those are the ones that have a pouch, and for example, in the back, and they will carry their eggs all over with them until they hatch. So this is an amazing adaptability of this class. But sadly, they are very, as I mentioned, endangered. So the main threats to this group, according to the last Global Amphibian Assessment, this is an amazing work that took more or less 10 years to gather all the data. It took the collaboration of more than 1,000 scientists around the world to come up with a very thorough assessment of 8,011 species and the threats that these different species are facing. So in the first place, we still have, sadly, habitat loss. And this is really, let's say, the main threat that amphibians are facing. And within habitat loss, we have loss due to agricultural practices or infrastructural development or timber, for example, extraction. So those are the, let's say, the main three within habitat loss. Then we have, surprisingly, or not that surprisingly, but it wasn't, let's say, scaled like this, climate change is now the second biggest threat to amphibians, because it's been assessed in the past, but it wasn't kind of very clear how much of a threat it was for this group of animals. And now, after this assessment, it's clear that a lot of species are directly or indirectly affected by climate change. And then the third, among the different threats that we have, the third, I'm mentioning the three more impactful threats. Then we have disease. So the third threat that's really impacting on amphibians is disease, mainly the BD or the chytrid fungus and the BSAL. That's the new disease that's threatening salamanders, and these are mainly I would say the most impactful threats that I can mention to you. There are others, for example, wildfires, for example, and natural disasters, but I think the interesting assessment we can make from this is the fact that these threats that I mentioned, they don't act in a vacuum. They're interconnected. So disease will be impacted by climate change and habitat destruction, and same thing. Habitat loss will be impacted by disease, and wildfires and all these different other threats. So they interact. And so that's why it's sometimes a little difficult to measure the specific impact of a single threat, because they never act alone.
Fantastic. That was an excellent summary of amphibians and the threats that they're facing as well. It sounds like the situation is quite dire, but it sounds like you've also got some incredible scientists from around the world working on these issues every day. So I'm excited to hear more about that. I'm also interested, firstly, if you have a few favorite amphibians that you're particularly passionate about, or ones that people might not have heard of. And then also if you could just talk a little bit about the amphibians other than frogs, because I think a lot of people think of frogs when they think of amphibians, but there are some other cool ones out there.
Of course. Probably we should start with your last question. So amphibians, the class Amphibia, it's divided in three big orders. So the first one will be frogs and toads, which is the anurans. Then we have the salamanders, which is the Caudata order. And then we have the caecilians, which is the Hypnophiona order. So from the entire, let's say, 100% amphibian biodiversity, you'll have frogs and toads. They represent 88% of the global amphibian biodiversity. Then salamanders, 9% of the amphibian biodiversity, the global amphibian biodiversity, and caecilians, 3%. So these are the rarest amphibians, the caecilians. They resemble worms, but they are not worms. They are amphibians. They are usually um, ground dwellers, and they're nocturnal mainly, so it's very hard to run into one of those. And these are also the less studied group, because again, it's very hard to find them, locate them, and study them in the long term. So we're also encouraging researchers and organizations to turn their eyes towards caecilians, because we need a lot more of information from this particular order.
Are there any good tips for finding caecilians? I've always been wanting to find one and I haven't managed to stumble across one. Is there any suggestions that you've got?
Well, depending on where you are and the species, for example, if you're close to a stream at night, and on the sides of the stream, beneath, the dry leaves or the wet leaves, wet leaves that are that fall from the trees, very humid areas, but not flooded areas, and very close to the ground. So you'll have to probably dig a little bit, turn rocks around. Usually people will do this inside the water, but they will not be found there, and they will be kind of on the sides, on the banks. And that's probably what I can tell you. Other species, they're forest dwellers, and those are harder to find because you'll have to basically dig, the leaves and the rotten tree trunks. They sometimes dwell in there as well. But as with many amphibians, they're they're not easily found, because you need to invest a lot of search hours and search effort to find and track amphibians, and it's even harder if they are smaller in size. So concerning your question, well, I was mentioning the three orders, and for example, from these three orders, and again in general, I could mention that most amphibians, or you'll find the highest biodiversity of amphibians in the neotropics.
Gina mentions a bunch of geographical terms here which refer to so-called biogeographic realms or ecozones. So the neotropics is a region containing most of Central America and the Caribbean, as well as all of South America, while the Afrotropics refers to all of sub-Saharan Africa, including Madagascar, as well as the southernmost part of the Arabian Peninsula. There are 8 biogeographic realms in total, and you can check the link in the show notes if you'd like to learn more. Okay, back to the podcast.
So basically, and in second place, I would say it's the Afrotropical region. So the neotropics, they hold 48% of all global amphibian biodiversity. That's why it's so important to kind of focus efforts on high amphibian biodiversity locations or regions. Then you have the Afrotropics, and they have 15% of all global amphibian biodiversity. The Indo-Malayan region, Palearctic, Nearctic, and what we call the Australasian regions, they also have they don't have that like super high numbers on biodiversity, but for example, Australia and New Zealand are very popular, let's say, because of their efforts on studying and preserving amphibians. They have not as many species, for example, but they're I think a model to follow, because they have for the past years developed and evolved towards a more amphibian focused conservation culture, and they do have 9% of all global biodiversity.
For those tuning in from Australia, be sure to check out the Frog ID app by the Australian Museum. It's a fantastic way to get involved in citizen science and learn about the amphibians in your region, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay, back to the podcast.
So Currently, from all the 8,700 described species and all the families and the genera.
Just quickly, genera is the plural of genus, which is the next level up from species when classifying organisms. So each species is placed in a genus, and each genus is placed in a family, and so on. Check out the link to taxonomic rank in the show notes to learn more about how organisms are classified.
There are approximately 65 exceptionally threatened genera, what we call. So these are located in specific and distributed in specific areas around the world. So the last global amphibian assessment, or the global amphibian assessment 2, identify what now we call the threatened amphibian landscapes. And these are particular, and to be exact, 50 landscapes around the world that hold 71% of all endangered amphibians. And yeah, so this is good and bad. It's good because we can focus conservation efforts on these landscapes. And probably the impact will be in a higher number of threatened species than if we randomly select any landscape to work on. And it's also bad because if there's any particular situation, sociocultural, anything that happens to or affects these places, we might also lose a lot of species. So yes, and well, then going to your question of favorite amphibians, that's a very, very tricky one. Because as I mentioned before, we have this group is so diverse, and you'll have so many amazing different species. But I will have to say that very close to my heart is the Atelopus genus, and among those, the Panamanian golden frog. I'm from Panama, and I've studied that species for almost 15 years now. This is a species that's possibly extinct in the wild since 2009. And there's some captive breeding populations where we're trying to make an effort to keep them alive, keep them going, and see if it's possible to make reintroductions in the wild. This is an endemic species from Panama. It's a very charismatic one, beautiful, bright yellow and black. It's a poisonous species because these are dart frogs, and it holds a very powerful toxin called sedecite toxin. So the pharmacological potential of this species is also amazing. But yes, in Panama, since pre-Columbian times, the species was kind of associated with good luck. And it was kind of a good luck charm, even from those times. And if you go to museums here, and you'll find some gold artifacts made by the pre-Columbian civilizations here in Panama with Panamanian golden frogs from that time. So, and it's also one of Panama's national animals. We celebrate the National Golden Frog Day on August 14th every year. And it's also been a kind of a process for the population to understand the situation of the species, care for the species, and kind of develop this familiarity and stewardship towards conserving the species and bringing it back. So that's why I could say that's my favorite one. But I do also have a couple of really good competitors. For example, there's another species from the Helidae family called Tripion spinosus, which I really, really like. These guys, these are tree frogs, and they reproduce in holes in tree trunks. Their reproductive behavior is amazing because they will amplex. The female will lay some eggs that will be fertilized, and then the tadpoles would feed on not fertile eggs that the female keeps laying. And yes, so and then they kind of safely grow in these holes and then go up there. And these are beautifully toning, like a brownish golden and gray and black combination. These are I would say couch potatoes because they are not very active, but they're amazing animals and striking as well.
Amazing. I'm so excited. I love frogs, and it's always really exciting to hear about someone who's worked with frogs for so long, to hear which ones are standouts for them. And I'm really keen to hear a little bit later about some of those breeding efforts that you've been working on, particularly with the Panamanian golden frog. It's really exciting. But you're on the podcast because you're the executive director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance. So tell us a little bit about the organization and what you're trying to achieve.
Of course, this is an organization that was established in 2012. And its establishment came as a result of the publication of the first global amphibian assessment, then the creation of the amphibian specialist group of the IUCN, and the publication of the first amphibian conservation action plan, the first ACAP. So what was happening is that it was identified that a global coordinating entity was missing to be able to guide the implementation of these global plans. The global plans exist. They existed at that time and exist now. But there was kind of, okay, here's the information. This is everything we need to do. But who's doing it? How are we going to do it? Who's coordinating? We don't know. So due to this need, ASA is born. And it's born as a partnership of organizations, an alliance, let's say, of organizations that are working on amphibian conservation. And these include big organizations that have many other programs besides amphibian conservation, or organizations that solely focus on amphibian conservation. So we have also big zoos or grassroots organizations that are starting focusing solely on amphibian conservation as well. And currently we have 69 partners around the world, and we're growing as well. We have 22 additional partners in process, and we're constantly in the process of finding and identifying partners around the world, because that's the only way that we can move forward and strengthen global initiatives.
Could you give some examples of the partners, some of the partners that you're working with?
Yes, of course. We do have, for example, the Smithsonian Institution, Chester Zoo. We have the COANA organization in Argentina, or the Bolivian Amphibian Initiative in Bolivia. We have ASAP as a partner in Asia. We're in the process, for example, of getting Melbourne University of Australia as a partner. So we have a series of different types of organizations, because we also work with research institutions, academic institutions, governmental institutions, or NGOs as well. So any organization that has a program or is interested on having an amphibian program is welcome to be an an ASA partner. And as I was mentioning, we've realized and understood through experience that the way to move amphibian conservation forward is creating alliances, connecting people, and strengthening collaborations. Because yes, individual work, isolated work has some impact, but the impact of working as a group and working as an alliance is way bigger. And that's what we do. What we do is trying to strengthen initiatives and collaborations around the world for amphibian conservation and kind of making a difference on the ground for amphibians and for organizations and researchers as well, because you need to take care of all of the moving parts. And this is also very related to funding. So we provide some funding. We have funding programs for the general public or for the partners as well, or for researchers. One of our most popular programs is called Future Leaders of Amphibian Conservation. And this is, for example, a program directed to young conservationists, amphibian conservationists. And it will support, for example, research programs or capacity building or research projects for this group of people. We have other programs to support amphibian conservation, for example, disease mitigation grants. And these are mainly focused on providing support for amphibian conservation research or amphibian disease research or initiatives. We're also very involved in, let's say, policy towards supporting amphibian conservation. And we work closely with advisors such as the Amphibian Specialist Group of the IUCN and the Amphibian ARC, which is kind of the organization responsible of coordinating ex situ efforts, amphibian ex situ efforts around the world. So we work very closely with these two or other organizations.
Just quickly, ex situ efforts refer to conservation programs that take place outside of an animal's natural habitat. For example, a breeding program located in a zoo or research institute. This is opposed to in situ conservation efforts, which take place outdoors in an animal's natural environment. Okay, back to the podcast.
Let's say that the ASG, the Amphibian Specialist Group, will provide the science behind the decision making. The Amphibian ARC will provide the support for the ex situ conservation efforts, and ASA will coordinate the initiatives globally. So yes, besides, like, we provide programs for support, we coordinate global initiatives, and we also, for example, utilize as a roadmap important documentation that we help also to produce. For example, the Amphibian Conservation Action Plan, the ACAP. Currently, I think the new version should be published soon, but the draft is available on the Amphibian Specialist Group website. And that's a massive document, probably 900 pages long, that addresses a lot of the different priorities required for amphibian conservation. And we also work with the priorities identified with within the global amphibian assessments to kind of understand what are the priorities and what are the initiatives that need to be prioritized globally and regionally as well.
Brilliant. That all sounds really exciting. I'm particularly interested in the Future Leaders program that you mentioned. Could you give some examples of initiatives that you've supported through that?
Yes, of course. Well, I need to explain that the original program, as it was kind of, let's say, launched at the beginning, was slowly supporting student or young conservationists to attend conferences, because when you're in the process of graduating or getting your PhD or your master's or even your undergrad, and you're very invested on amphibian conservation research, usually you struggle a lot to get funding and to attend conferences. Conferences are a great ecosystem to first understand what other people are working on, to develop collaborations, and that usually result in other projects and initiatives. So, but then after the new strategic plan was implemented, we decided that we could do so much more with this program, way more than only supporting conference attendance. So as we speak, actually last Friday, we closed our third call for this year for the Future Leader program. And this is the first time we are launching the capacity building and the research support version of it. So what we're for example, now offering, it's paying for capacity building courses on, for example, animal conservation, or disease related training. And right now we're in the process of reviewing the batch of proposals, the research proposals we got for this first round of research support. So I will be able to tell you a little more about that in the near future. But currently and in the past, we've supported many young conservationists to attend, for example, the World Congress of Herpetology.
Just to jump in, herpetology is the collective term for the study of reptiles and amphibians.
Or the Latin American Congress of Herpetology, or the Amphibian Conservation Research Symposium that we also coordinate. And this has given these young researchers the opportunity to, some of them move forward and establish their own NGOs as well, and kind of grow professionally from all these different experiences. So now we're very happy because the acceptance to this new version of the Future Leader program, it's been like very good, and we had a lot of proposals that we had to evaluate for this particular round. So what we've done, it's, let's say, dividing between the 3 different calls that we have per year, and kind of dedicate one to capacity building, and another one for support to conference attendance, and another one for research. So that way we can kind of still support conference attendance, and then add these 2 other components that we believe are really, really important for the formation of new, holistic conservationists.
That's great. It sounds like a really amazing opportunity for young researchers to get involved. Very cool. I'm interested to discuss your work at the Ark in Panama, but before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about chytrid. So what exactly is chytrid, and why is it such a big deal in the world of amphibians?
Chytrid, or let's invoke the name Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis. That's why we call it BD for short, or chytrid.
Okay, I'm gonna go with BD.
Yes. Yeah, this is a fungus. And the story of BD, it's, I would say, interesting for one side, and tragic, but very interesting. Towards the end of the 80s, the decade of the 80s, let's say 1989, the amphibian researcher community started realizing that the amphibian populations were fluctuating way more than they usually do, because that's one tricky thing. Amphibian populations in the wild, they usually fluctuate, and it's normal to see some fluctuations depending on weather and many factors. But then this great decreases in population sizes or disappearances of entire populations started to happen. And when you listen to the stories of the people involved at that time, as they were very isolated, because we didn't have at that time social media or email or anything like that, like each of them thought it was a local thing happening to their own single population that they were studying. And it's not only until they meet at the first World Congress of Herpetology, that they started realizing that this was happening everywhere. So that's the first time, let's say, the alarms were ringing, that there was something happening. So the evolution of how it gets to get discovered and how the conservation community turns their kind of attention towards amphibian, it was slow. But I think now we're seeing the results, the positive results of that, but it's taking 40 years, more or less, or more. And it's also sadly taking, losing some species to extinction. But then these massive efforts of research started happening, trying to understand what was happening to these different populations. And some of these efforts started in Costa Rica, in the Monteverde area, and in Ecuador as well. And then some scientists from Smithsonian were able to identify that probably there was, it was a disease happening, and it was a fungus. And the description happened more than 10 years after that. But then understanding where this came from, or what happened to it, or why it's now this affecting amphibians, took many more years. So it was until, I think, 2019 that this question was answered. And it turns out that, like tracing back via molecular studies, researchers were able to identify the southern Korean peninsula as the source of the fungus. So there are many different theories on how this got spread around the world. But first, I'm going to tell you how it works. So this is a fungus that has a mobile spore and an aquatic spore. So the spore has a flagellum, or a tail, that will swim in the water. And the average movement of the fungus, let's say, it's like around 79 kilometers per year. But then they swim in the water. Then when they find amphibian skin, or an amphibian, of course, they will attach to the skin, penetrate the skin. So as you know, the amphibian skin is pivotal for their gas exchange. They do have lungs, but they do part of the exchange, the gas exchange through their skin, and also for the osmoregulation, and also to keep the skin wet, as they usually have. They have a specific equilibrium of humidity, and the skin of the frog is a very sensitive organ. And is essential for their survival. So what the fungus does is they once they infect the skin of the frog, it will thicken the skin, adding keratinizing the skin. So what happens is that the frog will slowly suffocate and have a cardiorespiratory arrest, and they will die. So it's a very painful and awful death, and usually, depending on the species and on the temperature of the ecosystem, or where they're located, it can be very quick or slower, but it can take from infection towards death, let's say a month or a month and a half. Some species have developed strategies. For example, some Atelopus species will sunbathe, because this fungus is sensitive to high temperatures and to very, very, very low temperatures. So some amphibians will expose themselves to higher temperatures, which they are also sensitive to, but for example, to keep the progression of the disease in check or slower. So they are already showing some evolutionary behaviors towards the existence of the disease. But then going back to what I was telling you about how this got spread around the world, originally there were some different theories. For example, the hypothesis of frogs being used for pregnancy tests. During the 50s and 60s, frogs, mainly from a specific species, which is Xenopus levis. This is a BD-resistant frog from Africa, but it's also a very commercialized species. It's used a lot for testing, for laboratory research and all that. So during these years that we didn't have the rapid pregnancy tests that we have today, many laboratories around the world and hospitals will have a frog colony, and pregnancy tests will be done on frogs. And these will be by injecting women urine and in the frog, probably mainly in the dorsal area of the frog, and assessing the urine of the frog 2 or 3 days after, and there was any sperm in the urine of the frog, means that the female is pregnant. And this is because pregnant women excrete human chorionic gonadotropin in the urine, and this hormone stimulates the production of sperm and in male frogs and of eggs in female frogs. So those were the kind of primordial pregnancy tests. But then, yes, then progress happened, and then the modern tests were developed, and now and those individuals were released in a lot of places around the world. So that's one of the hypotheses. The other one is due to the Korean War. There was a lot of movement in and out the Korean Peninsula, and the spores can be carried. If you walk, for example, in an infected area, you can get the spores on your feet, on your shoes, and move and transfer them to other places. So due to this kind of massive movement of equipment, people, everything in and out, this also might have been one of the factors that contributed to spreading the fungus around the world. But there's no specific answer to how this started appearing in like every continent. And there's also other kind of studies that have shown that the kind of the fungus had kind of the spreading behavior was kind of a wave spreading behavior, starting from a single point at the same time in different places. So that's why it's difficult to understand exactly how and when it got to specific places. But there are, as I mentioned, some theories as the ones that I mentioned. But yes, this is chytrid. And then many species are very susceptible to chytrid. Some of them are resistant. Some of them are semi-resistant, so meaning that they can survive in nature or co-inhabit with the disease. But I think most of the species are sensitive to it. So and here's where kind of understanding the dynamic of the disease in different species, it's super important. So we know what is the course of action we need to take for conserving specific species. In the case of the Panamanian golden frog, it is believed that the main cause of its disappearance is chytrid. And here's where captive breeding programs enter into action, because for some of these species, these programs are the only hope for survival, because the main threat, which is chytrid, is out there everywhere. And in addition to that, of course, there's a big group of researchers trying to understand what can be done in terms of protecting the sensitive species from chytrid. And there's a lot of research on the probiotics. For example, these are the bacteria that inhabit the skin of the frogs. So it's been shown that for some species, it's the bacteria that inhabit their skins that protect them from the fungus. But this is not the case for all of the species. So some studies have tried to modify the existing bacteria and try to make it BD resistant. Other studies are trying to see how the immune system reacts and why how the amphibian immune system reacts to BD. And one of the tricky things is, as I mentioned before, for reproductive strategies, the diversity of amphibians makes them also very species specific for most of the different aspects. So what's working, or what could be the case for one species, that's probably not going to be the case for others. So research needs to be very species specific, and understanding the immune reaction to BD, and if there is the possibility of developing, for example, vaccines, it's possible or not. There's also some work trying to modify, genetically modify the genome or the genes of some of species to see if these will make any changes towards their reaction to BD. Yes, there is a massive effort trying to being done, trying to understand or trying to develop any strategy and see if there is anything to be done with the fungus. If you ask me, I think we need to try to favor evolution and trying to find those individuals that are naturally more resistant, and trying to do some assisted breeding towards breeding individuals that show some resistance to it. While these other efforts are, in progress, but they have taken a lot of time. And in the meantime, we keep losing species or populations of species that can be saved.
That was an incredible summary. I had 5 or 6 different questions about chytrid, and you answered all of them, so that was great. You touched on it a little bit there, but I guess one of the most important aspects in the fight against chytrid is the so-called frog ark in Panama and
Yes.
other sort of captive breeding programs. Could you tell us a little bit about the ark and what you're doing there?
Yes. So the Panama Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Project, it's called, is an initiative that resulted from collaboration of international organizations. Mainly, it's led by the Smithsonian Institution, and within the Smithsonian, 2 of their organizations, which is the Smithsonian Zoological Park Conservation Biology Institute and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So the project opened its doors in 2015 in the Gamboa town, which is located very close to the Panama Canal and probably an hour away from the city. It's right at to the side of one of our rainforests. It's called Parque Soberanía, which it's one of the protected areas that's right besides the Panama Canal and responsible for protecting the basin, the Panama Canal basin. So the project currently holds 12 species, 12 Panamanian amphibian endangered species. Among those, I think we have 5 Atelopus species, and other species such as the one I mentioned before, Tripium spinosus, Gastrotheca cornuta. We have Agalignis lemur, different species with different conservation statuses and national priorities for conservation. The project has 7 containers, well-adapted containers. And inside those are biosecure containers. We have specific and very strict biosecurity protocols because we need to avoid chytrid getting to the captive breeding program. These containers, they each have the maintenance tanks where these animals live, and reproduction tanks. So when there's the time to reproduce the frogs, then we'll move them from the maintenance tanks to the reproduction tanks and see if we are lucky enough to have a breeding event. Then we have around 2,500 animals in total, and we should have more because we're kind of getting or trying to get to the numbers that we need to hit. We need to have at least between 300 and 500 individuals from each species, so we can maintain the genetic variability sufficiently high for a future reintroduction event. So we've already accomplished that for, I think, 2 or 3 of the species, but we're working very hard to get there for the rest. The facility also has an insect production building. That's the newest, let's say, addition to the project, because we feed these animals ad libitum, meaning live prey, and we need to produce the different food sources, meaning crickets, colembolas. We have different sources and different invertebrates that we produce, and that we feed then to the different species and the different stages of each species. So, for example, of course, a tadpole will eat usually algae, and that's specially prepared when they're in the tanks. But when they come out of the water, then that we call the post-metamorphs. Those eat very, very tiny insects called colembolas, and then as they grow, then we'll feed on pinheads, which are like the tiny, tiny crickets. So as they grow, the food also has to grow in size. So we need to produce different types of insects and keep different life stages of those to feed the different life stages that these frogs go through. We also have an office space, then a laboratory and a quarantine area. And we also have a tiny space for the public towards the entrance of the building, because this is close to the public mainly for biosecurity reasons, because we're holding a very sensitive population in there, and having movement of people coming in and out increases the probability of getting BD or any other infection within the population very easily. So what we try is to keep this area, we call them kind of the educational area, and there's a lot of information on the walls about what the project is, what we do, why we exist. And then we have kind of a glass window towards one of the containers where you can see some of the frogs. But for kind of tours, specific tours that we sometimes give to researchers or donors, they need to be planned ahead of time. We can do those with personnel from the project, and those are guided and require specific permits. But yes, that's basically the project. The effort started way before, probably around 2005, with Proyecto Rana Dorada, And this was another international collaboration, for example, with Houston Zoo and other organizations. And this started when we knew the fungus, the BD, was getting or reaching the area where the Panamanian golden frogs were inhabited. So there was a massive rescue effort to go and get most of them from nature and save them from the epidemic or pandemic, I would say. And then one of the local hotels from El Valle area, which is kind of the area where this frog is endemic from, they provided 3 rooms at that time, because we didn't have the capacity nor the personnel nor anything. So this kind of emergency rescue effort could be established there, and the first facility was established in El Valle, and at that time it was called EVAC, El Valle Amphibian Conservation Center. But then this new bigger facility was built, and then the efforts, like we separated efforts from the people that were kind of leading the EVAC facility. So now we have the park facility, which has all of these different, resources that I mentioned before. So we receive also researchers, postdoctoral researchers. We also collaborate with the academic realm, and then we have students. We support thesis for undergrads, for master's students or PhD students coming from abroad. So we do have all these different components: the research component, the actual conservation component, the education and awareness component. So we try to make an impact for at least these 12 species, and for the other ones that require also attention in situ.
That's incredible. So you started out running out of a hotel room trying to save these frogs, and now you're running a little mini frog Jurassic Park by the sounds of it.
Correct.
I know with captive bred mammals, for example, they often struggle to reintegrate into the wild. Is there a similar challenge with amphibians when it does come to releasing them? Do they start to lose their survival instincts over time and that kind of thing?
Yeah, there are similar struggles, but different in, let's say, in nature. An example I can give you is dart frogs. Dart frogs, they lose their toxins in captivity because they are not born with them. It seems they are born with kind of a small percentage of them, but most of the toxins that they have in the wild come from the insects that they prey upon. Which ones exactly, we don't know, because this is the result of specific diet and a combination of of molecules that come from different sources. So we have done 2 reintroduction trials so far, because reintroduction is not as easy as people think. It's not like you breed a whole bunch of frogs and then you just put them back. It doesn't work like that. In the case of, for example, dart frogs, they lose their toxins, so they are easily preyable. And what we're doing now is trying to spice them. So there's a couple of research projects to feed them alkaloids and see if they recuperate their toxicity. So when they're released into the wild, they have these natural defenses. Usually when frogs in the wild, they are born, let's say an aquatic frog, an aquatic breeder comes out of the water and then starts exploring the world. They're not usually, let's say, trained to avoid predators, because remember that these happens differently in mammals because usually you have parental care with mammals. So the youngsters will learn from the behaviors they see in their parents. This is not the case in amphibians. They will go into the world, and then it's survival time. And that's not one of the factors. It's not like I don't know how to avoid a predator because I'm supposedly built in to be avoided. But if I don't have that defense, let's say, built in, I will be eaten easily. So this is one of the factors. The other one is also numbers. For example, the percentage is the same thing that happens, for example, with turtles, that you have a big clutch of eggs, and the statistics say probably one or two will make it after a year. So with frogs, you'll have an enormous number of eggs that they will lay. But then you have that not all of the eggs will be fertilized. And those that are fertilized, not all of them will develop in tadpoles. And from those that develop as tadpoles, not all of them will survive in the metamorphosis stages. And from those that do survive it and come out of the water, then you have a different, different number from the number of eggs that you had at the beginning. So these numbers go, they go decreasingly or slowly, decreasing in numbers. And when you have the ones that were able to make it out of the water, the post-metamorphs, then they go and start living their terrestrial life. And some of them will be eaten, some of them will die, some of them will be injured. So the survival rate naturally, just because how things happen in nature, it's low. So that's why these are some of them are the R species that will produce a lot of eggs, a lot of offspring, and with no parental care. You will have some species that have parental care, but this is a minority, like super minority. Most of them will just behave as a R species.
Interesting. Yeah, I know there's some of the dart frogs where the male carries the tadpoles on the back. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it all sounds like really exciting and interesting work. I'm quite jealous, to be honest. I'd like to shift focus to you as an individual now, if that's all right, Gina. So tell me, what's your earliest memory of frogs and amphibians? Where did your passion come from?
My earliest memory, I live in Panama, which is a tropical country. And since I was little, I remember having the common toad everywhere, in my house, inside my house, in my backyard, in front of the house. And it was always kind of a chaotic scene because we had dogs. And our dogs were usually, I don't know why, because there's dogs that are smarter than others, but these were schnauzers, so they will have this hunting instinct very built in, and they will always run after the toads and get poisoned, and we had to run to the vet, and then it was always like that. But I was always like very I don't know, they never I never got the reaction that I usually see in many people, because that's one disadvantage that this group has, that many people are like, ew, no, I don't like frogs. It's like kind of a rejection of them. I never did that or felt that. I will actually hold them and get them out of the house and safely put them back kind of in an open area, or, there's a little stream that runs close to my house, and I will take them there. And I will used to also sit by the stream and watch the tadpoles swim everywhere, and the foam nests that they do. They make So I will always, like, with a little stick, I will kind of observe the nest and move it around and see where the eggs were. So I was very interested since I was little, on amphibians, and to be honest, every single living thing that wasn't a human. So I've always been very, like, drawn to nature. But yeah, I grew up, surrounded by frogs, and by toads, and it was, of course, by the time I was little, there was no amphibian crisis, so this situation was not an issue, and frogs were super common, and I live in a place that is very green, and you'll hear every night the frogs singing at night. And after I got older and time passed, then you listen to it going quieter and quieter and quieter. So now I live in the same house I grew up, and I rarely see a toad. So they are not as abundant as they were. Let me give you an example. I think I will be running into one or more toads probably 3 or 4 times a week. Now, if I do that 3 or 4 times a year, it's too much. Yeah, so those are my my earliest memories at my house. But then I used to go camping a lot with my family, and I will always kind of look for frogs, and kind of observed. Every time I would run into one, I will, like, just sit down and observe, and sometimes I will sit there and do nothing. So I will sit there with them, just looking at them and observing them. But I was initially more drawn to mammals than to amphibians, because I thought I was going to study mammals. But the universe has ways to take you where you need to be. So that's why I started studying tapirs. And then when I was starting my PhD program, it was exactly at the same time as when the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, specifically the reproductive, the department that takes care of all the reproduction studies and research, they identified the fact that they didn't have anyone working on amphibians, and the need to establish a reproduction program for amphibians. And then we sat down. I remember the day exactly. We were sitting down trying to analyze some different aspects of the department in general. And then they just offered me to study Panamanian golden frogs and start this kind of the amphibian leg or arm of the department. And I was like, okay, I felt, I cannot describe to you exactly how it felt, but I did feel this kind of calling that you need to do this. It's like there's a huge need. This is the most endangered group. Someone needs to do something, and I don't know if you add every someone, you'll have a whole bunch of someones, and maybe we can move the needle a little bit. So I was like, okay, I'll do it, and that's how I just forgot about mammals and dove head in the amphibian world and never left since then.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I love the journey. I'm interested to go back to something you said before about how a lot of people have this sort of adverse reaction to amphibians and frogs and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I'm interested, what do you say to someone who doesn't really care about amphibians or maybe hasn't had a lot of exposure to them? Why is the work that you're doing important for them?
Well, initially what I don't tell people what to think or how to feel. I think the first step is trying to understand what they feel and what they think. So when you listen to people first, you can identify if there's rejection or or an adverse reaction. You can identify where this is coming from. And once you have this open conversation, then you start. What I usually do is start explaining a lot of information that people are unaware of about amphibians, and I basically go kind of to the weak spot, which is it doesn't fail. It's like, do you like roaches? No, 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 I don't. Well, oh, do you like having roaches in your house? No, no, no. So you need to conserve amphibians because those are the ones that will eat every insect that's bothering you in your house. And then they will be like, seriously? Because there's a lot of basic information that a lot of people are unaware of about amphibians. So, for example, I do have an image that I love, which is a woman in a tub holding a book, having a bath and a bottle of wine, and the entire room covered with mosquitoes and insects. And there's a caption that says, if amphibians go extinct, you'll notice. And that's why I try to explain people that there's a lot of services that amphibians provide us that we're unaware of, and that just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I usually go and explain also about their role in the ecosystems. And for example, one of the classic answers that I get is like, "Oh, but they're slimy." I was like, "Have you ever held a frog?" And they will be like, "No." Do you know some of them will look like slimy, but they are not? Oh, I didn't know that. It's like when you start kind of opening the curiosity and igniting the curiosity, they become interested, and suddenly that reaction starts to lower. And it takes time. It's not a single conversation situation or change. But I've done kind of the experiment here in Panama. You need to know that Panama is a very tiny, tiny country where everybody knows each other. So when I started working with frogs, I kind of started this social media campaign with like my private social media. And then it was interesting seeing the evolution of it all, because it started with, I was, let's say post a picture of a frog, and people would say like, "Oh no, ew, I don't like it, it's ugly." And then little by little kind of started sensitizing the people. Now I have, "It's beautiful. Do you have any other pictures? Oh, it's lovely." So I think it takes time and strategy to understand your audience, even if that is your kid, your sister, students, or a community, and start understanding why they are not feeling this kind of familiarity or empathy towards amphibians, and start working from that angle. So you can start making a change, and it will take some time. So you need to be aware that it's going to take some time. But as long as you're aware of that, and then you have the right strategy, you can make a change, for sure.
Absolutely. I think that enthusiasm that you've got is really sort of infectious as well. When people see someone excited about something, they can't help but sort of get a bit excited as well. I'm interested, what advice would you give to a young person who's interested in doing the kind of work that you do with amphibians?
First, I want to ask, when you say kind of work, you refer to the kind of work I do with ASA or research, or both?
Let's say both.
Okay. I would say first, what I always tell my students, and any young person that approaches me, is understanding the why. Why do you want to conserve amphibians? Understanding what they mean to you, and as long as you have a purpose and an objective, and you keep faithful to your purpose, you'll be able to get anywhere that you want. And then always, 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 I will say we need to be resilient, we need to be persistent, we need to be focused, and understanding that we need to put some effort to accomplish things, especially in the conservation world, and especially in the amphibian conservation world, that we have a lot of challenges. For example, funding, it's the main one, I think, as for any other taxonomy group. But there are some groups that are more, let's say, lucky than others. The charismatic groups, for example, get more funding than amphibians. But that's always going to be a challenge. So understanding that failure is an option, but not the destiny. Understanding that being perseverant is amazingly important. Surrounding yourself with the right people. And with the right people, I say people that will strengthen you and support you and help you move forward in your career. I think getting involved with different initiatives, even as a volunteer, because that's where you start getting experience and exposure and understanding the environment towards the environment you want to be exposed to, because that's also required. Connections, but I don't mean it I don't mean connections in the political way or anything like that, but in the sense of support and having this network of people that will support you during your journey to becoming a conservationist. And once you get there, meaning, for example, you go through an academic program and then you start your research, your experience in research, then in that realm you do need some connections for funding and for collaborations. So showing up is essential, and I think for conservation and for any other endeavor in our lives, showing up, being present, being persistent, and being focused. That's what I would say.
That's excellent advice. Thank you for that, Gina. I want to ask you about your toughest, most challenging day or experience working for the Amphibian Survival Alliance, and I also want to ask you about your best, most rewarding day or experience, and I'll let you decide which you'd like to speak about first.
Oh, wow. My toughest day. I wouldn't say there's a specific day, but a situation. And that situation comes from when we've had to, let's say, there are different kinds of tough situations, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples. When we evaluate proposals, where many different applicants have these urgent situations with critically endangered species that require help, immediate help, and we don't have enough funding for all of them, and we need to prioritize that. It's a difficult situation, because when you're that involved, it's like you would like to have funding for everybody, so everybody could go and help their own species. But then you have to make decisions and tell people, not this time, even though I know you're desperate because you want to save your species and you require help now. I'm not able to do that at the moment because there's this other species that requires it a little more than yours. So doing this prioritization is hard. It's hard on you if you care, and also the human component as well, because you also need to take into account that this is not only working with amphibians. You're working with people, like with amphibians through people. So you're working with people, and the human component of it all, it's super important for us at ASA, because these people are, the drivers of amphibian conservation. Amphibians cannot conserve themselves, so we have to do it. So that's one of the, I would say, real life tough situations, because sometimes you don't know if your decision is impacting a particular species or a population that might be lost over another one. But what we do afterwards is trying to coordinate all efforts indirectly to try to help support those initiatives. And I think one of the best days that I had, it was a recent experience that we coordinated the first ASA Global Assembly, and it was virtual. For the first time, we brought together all of ASA partners. It was a massive effort because we were holding regional assemblies, meaning that we were coordinating regional meetings for the different continents with the partners of those specific regions, and then getting them all together in a single meeting. It was a probably 30-hour effort, continuous, because we were having meetings at different time zones depending on the continents, and listening to all our partners, exposing their work, what they're doing, their challenges, their successes, and how ASA has been able to collaborate somehow to these efforts. It was really rewarding, and the amount of information you get from there and the potential of future initiatives that you can get from that kind of experience is amazing. And when we got all of them in a single virtual room for a general assembly, it was very touching, because you get to see people and faces together beyond what you're used to, which is email exchanges, in a couple of written communications, because we're a global alliance. It's not very common for us to see each other in person, and when we do, it's a couple of partners here and there, usually regional. But yeah, that was a really good accomplishment, because it's the first time that the Amphibian Survival Alliance brings all of its partners together in a single meeting. And now we're planning the next global assembly in person in India, and this it should be a really great experience in the Western Ghats. We're in the process of coordinating that, but that should be an amazing experience, because if the virtual one was so fulfilling and amazing, I cannot imagine how the in-person one is going to be.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. Cool. I'm aware of your time. We're almost done, but I have a couple of quick fire questions that I like to ask everyone. Do you have time for that, Gina?
Yeah.
Cool. You're allowed to pick one person, living or dead, and you get to live their entire life from start to finish. So you pause your life right now, you live their whole life, experiencing everything they've experienced, and then you come back to your life with all of their memories. Who do you choose?
Wow. I think I would choose Jane Goodall.
That's a great response. Why is that?
Because she's broken the mold. It's a person that's been committed her entire life to conservation, and the influence. You need to know that the place she's at now, it wasn't just because of from one day to the other. It was because of all the unnoticed work that she did when nobody knew who she was. And this was amounting and making such an impact that suddenly she started getting noticed. But this experience first, it had to do with research, then with community engagement, also with the very sad part of understanding the loss of the amazing species that she works with, and working in such a complicated environment. I think the learning process that she had, personal and professional, and what it took her to be one of the most, I think, influencing figures in the conservation world, it's probably amazing. I'm sure she's had a lot of challenges, as every person has personally, but I think she has pulled through. And the fact that she's able now to, with her words and with her experiences, influence decisions and policy, it's amazing to me. And I know that's the result of very hard work and a lot of years of hard work behind her. So that's who I would choose.
Yeah, she's an incredible individual. I was just listening to her interview with Monga Bay for her 90th birthday the other day, and she's still an incredibly captivating speaker as well, even at that age. And yeah, incredible.
Yes, and as I understand, because I am also part of the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund Advisory Board, and some of my colleagues there are very closely related to her. And one of them told me that she has, I think, 24 different travels planned for this year to celebrate her birthday.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? That's very impressive. All right. You wake up tomorrow to find you've been elected president of the world. You've got full power. Everyone's supportive of what you're doing. You don't need to compromise to win votes or anything like that. What's the first thing you do in order to protect the world's amphibians? Education. That's the first thing I would do, because every measure that you, let's say every strategy that you start and apply, it needs to be, or it needs to have a long-term plan. I'm not going to live forever, and not implementer is going to live forever. You need to have a stable base that keeps this going, and the only way to keep it going is to educating the community, the population, understanding the importance of these animals, understanding what we do to damage them and what we do to help them, and what we can do to help them thrive. So I think as with any other important crisis that we have, or I don't know, social situation that we have, education is the key. That's the first thing I would do. That's a great response. And a final question for you, Gina. If people were to donate money to the Amphibian Survival Alliance, what sorts of things would that money go towards?
Oh, well, many things. We do have options for supporting our programs, and these programs will ultimately support conservation actions on the ground, meaning either research projects on the ground or emergency grants, for example, for situations that are imminently threatening a specific population that we need to go and rescue. For example, right now we found out that in Mexico there's an amphibian species that's been threatening for the lack of water on a specific stream. One species of axolotl. So we're trying to coordinate with one of our partners to see what we can do to help that specific population. So we have that. We have the disease mitigation initiatives. We have support for protected areas. So in our website, we also have a membership program. And then through these membership programs, we have different tiers. So people can support us and get in exchange a lot of a package with information annually. And they do have the opportunity to, for example, participate in virtual events with our partners, or if there's any local event where they're with one of our partners, they can also participate and get a lot of information. And the funding that comes from that membership program, it's also channeled towards supporting these programs that what we offer, and ultimately supporting young conservationists and amphibians, critically endangered and endangered amphibians.
That's excellent. If you ever need someone to go along on one of those emergency frog rescue expeditions, let me know. That sounds like fun.
I will, for sure. You're in Peru, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm in Peru for another couple of months anyway.
Okay, good to know.
The idea with this podcast is that every month I want to feature a different not-for-profit organization, and then I also run a Patreon where people can support the project. So half the money helps me to keep sharing stories, and then the other half goes directly to the organizations that are featured. So I'll be sending that donation over to the Amphibian Survival Alliance very shortly.
Thank you so much.
No worries. A big thank you to all of the amazing people who support this project, and an even bigger thank you to you, Gina, for taking the time to chat with me about all of the incredible work you're doing today. It goes without saying that I love frogs and amphibians generally, and I really, really enjoyed learning about all of the amazing work you're doing. So thanks for the conversation, Gina.
Thank you, Brody, for inviting me today and for giving me the opportunity to speak about frogs and the work we do, and hopefully people listening care a little more about frogs after hearing your podcast.
I hope so. Thanks so much, Gina. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was Gina Della Togna, Executive Director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance. As always, I'd like to highlight 3 key points that Gina made, and the first is this one.
I grew up surrounded by frogs and by toads. And it was, of course, by the time I was little, there was no amphibian crisis, so this situation was not an issue. And frogs were super common. And I live in a place that is very green, and you'll hear every night the frogs singing at night. And after I got older and time passed, then you see, you listen to it going quieter and quieter and quieter. So now I live in the same house I grew up, and I rarely see a toad.
For those paying close attention to the natural world, trends like this can be seen everywhere. But humans have an interesting tendency to ignore changes that appear gradual to them. When I was a kid, I remember how a simple drive in the countryside would result in a windshield covered in splattered insects. Today, there's barely any, and yet I hadn't really noticed until it was pointed out to me. The same is true of fish stocks, large mammals, and, as Gina points out, amphibians. Indeed, wild animal populations globally have declined 70% on average in just the last 50 years. And we often don't pay enough attention to these shifting baselines. So it's worth taking a moment to look around and consider what animals were abundant when you were younger, and more importantly, what you can do to help bring them back. The next point I'd like to emphasize is this.
I think I will choose Jane Goodall.
That's a great response. Why is that?
Because she's broken the mold. It's a person that's been committed her entire life to conservation, and the influence. You need to know that the place she's at now, it wasn't just because of from one day to the other. It was because of all the unnoticed work that she did when nobody knew who she was. And this was amounting and making such an impact that suddenly she started getting noticed.
I just want to take a moment to talk about how cool Jane Goodall is. She is such a wonderful human being. I used to run these maths and science camps for secondary school kids when I was working for a university in Melbourne. And I remember one day asking a group of students what they were looking forward to. It was like an icebreaker activity or something. And this one girl quite sheepishly was like, "Oh, there's something I'm looking forward to, but I can't say what it is. I'm not allowed to tell anyone." And we were all like, "Oh, okay, fair enough then." And then all of a sudden she just goes, "I'm meeting Jane Goodall tomorrow." And it was like this secret event where young conservation leaders just get to hang out with Jane Goodall for the day. I don't think I've ever seen a teenager so excited about, well, anything, let alone spending time with an 80-something-year-old woman. But it's just a testament to the passion and dedication that Jane Goodall has for the planet and all the amazing creatures in it. I've got a link in the show notes to that Monga Bay interview I mentioned, and I'd highly recommend that people give it a listen. The final point I'd like to highlight is this.
And this started when we knew the fungus, the BD, was getting or reaching the area where the Panamanian golden frogs were. So there was a massive rescue effort to go and get most of them from nature and save them from the epidemic or pandemic, I would say. And then one of the local hotels from El Valle area, which is kind of the area where this frog is endemic from, they provided 3 rooms at that time because we didn't have the capacity nor the personnel nor anything. So this kind of emergency rescue effort could be established there. And the first facility was established in El Valle. And at that time, it was called EVAC, El Valle Amphibian Conservation Center.
This little anecdote really speaks to the importance of just starting somewhere, taking some kind of action when a challenge arises. From working out of a hotel room to protect a single endangered species to coordinating a global network of amphibian conservationists, there's no doubt that from little things, big things grow. Gina's work at the Ark in Panama is truly groundbreaking, and if you'd like to see it in action, the PBS series Wild Hope recently dedicated an entire episode to documenting it. I put a link to that in the show notes, and I'd highly recommend that people take a look. If you'd like to support the Amphibian Survival Alliance, you can donate to them directly or join their membership program by visiting amphibians.org, and you can follow their work on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. On behalf of all the amazing people who support this project, I was able to make a donation of $140 to the Amphibian Survival Alliance. If you'd like to help me give more money to more amazing NGOs in the future, please consider signing up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes for as little as $5 a month. In the show notes, you'll also find further information about a range of topics that Gina and I discussed during this conversation. Another big thank you to everyone who supports this podcast and to Gina Della Togna for being keen to chat with me about the incredible work of her and her team. I hope you found the Amphibian Survival Alliance as inspiring as I did, and I'll see you next month for another episode of Protect the World.